I feel like I can shout louder. So we are about to get started for our speaker session this afternoon. So if you want to grab a drink, please do. I would first like to start by thanking you all for coming out this afternoon and joining us. I launched this initiative at the start of the year with the goal of making this industry more accessible and equipping you with the tools and the knowledge to advance and grow your careers. And I'm really pleased that this is the final one for the year. My job's nearly done. I can now take a break. However, though, I couldn't have done this without the support of course, our wonderful speakers who have given their time up kindly this afternoon, our brand ambassador team, our event partners, Significant Insight and Aura Insight, and of course our wonderful sponsors. Elizabeth Norman International, thank you so much, they're our gold sponsors this evening. Alongside Opinium. That's it, let's give them a cheer. Our silver sponsors, which is Gift Pay. Our bronze sponsors, which is Test Set, Melbury Wood, iView London, XYZ Field, and Prevision Research. So if you need a sponsor, please do. I'd say buy them a drink, but they've already bought you one. So please give them a big cheer and thank them. So I'm now going to hand you over to the wonderful Liz Norman, who is going to introduce our speakers this afternoon.
Yes, so our three speakers are all coaches of different sorts. And I was just saying to them earlier, I am a great believer in both coaching and mentoring. In fact, one of the questions I want to ask them later is, what is the difference? Where does one start and one stop? I personally have had coaching and mentoring. I still have a mentor today, age 63. If you want to learn and you want to advance, then it's a great way of doing it, and you should never stop, really. So I'm really excited, actually, to hear what the three of you have got to say. The first one is Rachael. She is a life and leadership coach. Would that be fair? They're all going to introduce what they do individually as well. Second up, we have Zoe, who is a leadership coach. So I think your focus is more on how to get the most out of moving on in your career, isn't it? And the third is James, and he's a performance coach. And what we're hoping that you get from this is just a few tips on how to advance your career, move on, develop. So yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing it all. Let's start with Rachael.
Hello, I'm Rachael, nice to meet you all. I've got about 10 minutes, so you're going to have to keep me, So I want to start by asking you a question. Can you imagine waking up every morning and your mind is working for you rather than against you? So rather than your mind reacting to whatever's thrown at you in your day, you're actually creating your day. You're in control of your day. So I want to talk to you just for 10 minutes about the power of your self-story and how that can really shape your future. So this is a quote, I'm just going to read it out. It's by Stephen Bartlett, which some of you may know. He's an entrepreneur, a podcaster, he's one of the dragons, I think, now as well. And I think this guy should know, at 18, I think he was stealing food to eat. So, he's not come from a privileged background. And he says, research continues to reveal that your self-story, so what you say to yourself, what you think about yourself, is more important than anything else in achieving your goals in business and in life. Your self-story determines your reality. Oh my God, right, okay, it's quite important then, this self-story. What the hell am I saying to myself? What do I think about myself? How do we strengthen that self-story? that's going to shape our future. We want our self-story to be as strong as it can be. So the way to do that, I firmly believe, in all the research, talking to researchers today, so that everything points to the same thing. Building your self-awareness and developing your mindset is the place to start. So it's all about really knowing yourself in total clarity, being able to articulate that. And when you have that in total clarity, it builds a sort of self-authority, a sort of a grounded confidence, because you're making decisions and you're acting and responding from this self-awareness rather than, I'm just reacting to, or what are you doing? I'll do what you're doing, or do what I think I should be doing. And I don't suppose for a minute you guys behave like that. But once you have that clarity, you have that self-authority. So that's what I'm talking about. So knowing your values, knowing your strengths, and knowing your mission, I'm going to talk about these briefly, means that you can really navigate decision making so much more easily. And then mindset is super powerful, as we all know. But really that's where we're going to unlock change. We're going to find a different way, a new way, something you've not considered before. Because when you unlock your mind, everything changes. And that's a lot really of what coaches do, is work with mindset. So this is like my compass, and I just want to take a little stroll with you around my compass for a few minutes, and there may be the odd thing that you think is interesting. Let's see. So we'll start with values. So what do I mean by values? What's a value? Some of you may have heard of Brené Brown. If you haven't, look her up. She's a very interesting lady with a lot of research behind her. She says a value is a way of being or believing that we hold most important. So it's what's important to you, what really matters to you in life. So if you can get really clear on your values and what's important to you, you can move towards those values. Because if you're living in alignment and working in alignment with those values, you're going to feel a lot more fulfilled, you're going to feel a lot more authentic, you're going to feel a lot more just comfortable in your own skin. So getting really clear on those values. Now, of course, you could just print off something from the internet and tick a box and go, right, these are my values, ding, 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 yes. And actually, that's a really good place to start. But with every single one of the clients I work with, we do a deep dive at the start and get really clear on what are your values in your words. I have these amazing values that people come up with, but they make sense to them. They're in their words. And then we say, and you'll love this if you're a quant researcher, out of 10, how aligned are you with those in your life right now, in your work right now? What would you like that score to be? Where are the gaps? And you can see how once you know what's important, you can start to narrow those gaps. And you can start to see, well, oh, okay, that's why that situation felt really weird, because actually my values are being stuck all over in that scenario. Or when you have a really good kind of vibe or chemistry in an environment or with a person, probably because you've got a similar kind of outlook on life, what's important to you. So, total clarity on your values. And I wonder how many of you could tell me your top 2 values off the top of your head. That's what we're trying to get to. So what are those 2 things you can carry with you at all times? This is what I'm trying to follow. This is what I'm trying to create for myself. So values. Right, we're not going to do a big deep dive now, but here's a few questions. You can do this with a friend or with a partner at the weekend, and it's quite good fun. So you can ask each other these questions. Describe a peak experience. Why did it feel good? Who do you admire and why? What makes you pissed off or upset? There you go, I've got swear words in, James. Beyond the basics, what wouldn't you give up? So you can start to ask each other questions and mine it for values. So what's that saying about what's important to me? So have a go, see if you can get to maybe 6 to 8 values, and then ask yourself which of those 2 were most powerful for me. Right, values. So you've got total clarity on your values. Let's move to strengths. So having a clear articulation of your strengths is so important. If I said to you again, what are your top 3 strengths? Could you articulate them to me now, clearly? It's amazing how many people can't. So I'll give you a vague answer and a rough idea, but just knowing them immediately, that's what we're aiming for. And it's not just what am I good at, it's what energizes me, what makes me feel good. So we can do things. We were talking earlier, Liz, and you were saying about Or I can just do that. It's a learned behaviour, but it might not energise you, it might drain you a little bit. But you've done it so many times you can do it. So what are you good at? What energises you? How can we find out? So these are the sort of questions you can start to ask yourself. Just have a little moment with yourself and ask yourself these questions. Or, if you're going to talk to that friend or partner this weekend, you could say, what do you think my top 3 strengths are? You could maybe ask 8 to 10 people that you know, you've worked with, what are my top 3 strengths? Because often people see you differently, right, to how you see yourself. Another, if you want to go even deeper, there's obviously loads of tools out there. One I think is particularly good, and I have no affiliation with, but it's called Strengths Profile. So that's a good one if you want to firm up your kind of awareness of your strengths, because it looks at what you're good at, but also what energises you. So it brings that in and tells you kind of, you know, what you're already using and also what you're not using, strengths you've got that you're not using. So it's a really nice way to kind of discover a bit of your potential as well. So this is what we're aiming for. Top 2 values, power values, this is what's important to me. Top 3 strengths. If you can articulate your top 3 strengths, you can position yourself for the right roles, the right moments, the right opportunities. You're ready. So that's what we're aiming for. Mission, number 3. What do I mean by mission? I nearly called it purpose. JFK called it purpose. Efforts and courage are not enough without purpose. So this mission, let's not over-egg it, really what it is. It's not like, come on everyone, we're going to change the world. It's, who do you want to be every day? How do you want to show up? And what's the impact that you want to have on the people that you encounter, that are around you? Can you encapsulate that? What's your neon sign? What's your reason for getting out of bed, whatever you do? So I work with clients to write a leadership statement, a single sentence which sums up, you know, your raison d'etre really. This is what I'm here to do. So I'll give you mine. Mine is, I am the spark that ignites your potential. So whatever I do, I'm like, okay, that's my point. That's my point. You know, with my work, my kids, whatever, my poor kids, I know. But, you know, exhausting. That's my leadership statement. And I hope it just maybe at least makes you wonder a little bit, what's mine? What is it? What's that thing about me? So there's 2 questions here. What's the unique quality or strength that you want to be known for? So of those strengths that you've got together, which is the one? She's the one. And what impact do you want this to have on other people around you? I've had some beautiful statements, all wildly different from different clients, and they really just sum up that person and what makes them special, and everyone has something. So it's quite empowering when you find that. It can change, of course. Right, mission. Okay, so we've got our values, we've got our strengths, we've got our mission. Yes, we've got all that self-awareness. Gosh, not in 10 minutes, but yeah, we've got it. Mindset. This is really powerful. This is kind of where all your potential is. Because we've all got these habitual thoughts that we've built up, but they're just a perspective. And there are so many perspectives. So when you start to unlock that, all sorts of things become possible that you hadn't really considered. And that's when people go, oh my God, I love coaching. And you're like, thank you. Can you please tell everybody? Thank you. So mindset is amazing. Louise Hay is quite interesting in this area. If you accept a limiting belief, it will become a truth for you. So we all walk around with these truths in our head. They're not truths. They're just a perspective. So questions to ponder. What limiting beliefs do you hold? I'm too this, I'm not this enough, blah, blah, blah. We've all got them. We've all got them. Which ones are kind of limiting you? Your inner critic, I'm sure you all know about this, but we've all got a little dialogue in our head, and if you're thinking about going for a new role, making a change, doing something different, your inner critic's going to get super duper loud because through evolution, your brain's gone, oh shit, I need to keep this brain, this body safe, stop it. And it'll do everything it can to stop you doing it, right? So we have to work with that, against it a little bit, and calm it down. So what does your inner critic say that keeps you small? That's a really good one to ponder. When you next have that moment of doubt, scribble it down. And then maybe ask yourself how much truth is in that. probably not. So what does that mean for the reality that you're creating for yourself when you see those two things? What are my limiting beliefs? What's my inner critic saying? What's that creating for my reality? So, last slide, I believe. We know that self-story is really important. Whatever we're saying to ourselves, whatever we're believing, is going to create our thoughts and our feelings. It's going to feed all of this. But we can't really stop there with awareness. That's great, brilliant. Yes, got some self-authority. I didn't quite believe it. I'm telling myself that I'm all these things, but my brain's habitual. It's told me for years that I'm all these other things, right? So we've got to take action. Have to take action to create evidence, to feed the story, to make it a reality. So it's a beautiful loop of awareness, creating your self-story, taking action, building evidence. Because when you start to take action and you're actually living it, so when you're living your values, when you're using your strengths, when you're being your mission, your brain will believe it. So that action's critical, really. And I don't mean big things. I mean small things, little things, every day, incremental gains. You've probably heard about this, talked about a lot at the minute. Incremental gains. So if you've heard of James Clear, who wrote Atomic Habits, he has a brilliant quote. Every action we take is a vote for the kind of person we want to be. So it's a really nice thing to hold on to, like every day. What's my mission? So what would I do in this situation if I do that? You know, I'm all about kindness, whatever. I want people to feel great. I'm going to do the kind thing in this moment, right? You can see how these little things, and then your brain's going, you're a kind person. So whatever it is, your self-story, you have to take action and create the evidence. So I'm going to leave you with a quote. You can tell I love a quote, but I think Gandhi sums this up. All this wisdom's been around for a long time. Your beliefs become your thoughts. Thoughts become your words become your actions become your habits become your values, and your values become your destiny. And that's pretty much it. I want you to, just maybe if you get a moment, reflect on which of those bits of the compass could I do with a little bit of filling in on, and maybe see, right, I'm gonna try and do a little bit of work on that this weekend. I'm going to talk to a friend, I'm going to ponder, I'm going to journal. There's my challenge. Do you, if you wish to accept it. That's it from me. I'm Rachael Fraser. I'm a life and leadership coach. The point of that is that life and leadership work go hand in hand. You can't really separate them. It's really important to be holistic about this stuff, I believe. Please connect with me and follow me. I'd love you to. I'm on Instagram, I'm on LinkedIn, and I've got a monthly newsletter. Sign up on my website, or just give me your email later over a drink and I'll put you on the list. And a shameless plug for my next Accelerator Book Club. So this is an hour and a half at lunchtime. You don't have to read the book. You come along and I'll tell you all the bloody good stuff from the book. Maybe do a couple of exercises and you'll walk away with a nice juicy action plan to get started on as you leave the book club. So I'd like you to come. The next one is the Stephen Bartlett book, The Diary of the CEO, which is actually really good. So please do come. That's it. I'm going to hand over to Liz.
Thank you, that was brilliant. I've got so many questions now. Zoe, please.
Be on my holidays there, I see. It's really good to be here, nice to see everybody. My name's Zoe and I help talented researchers become effective managers and strategic leaders. I used to work agency side for 15 years and then I qualified as a coach like these other guys. I think management and leadership is fantastic and also really necessary. They do say, people don't leave companies, they leave bosses. And I think the opportunity to really develop yourself and to have an impact on those you work with, on the work you do for clients, your agency, and maybe the community around that as well, is such a privilege. So I think management leadership is great, but it's not easy. being an amazing researcher, or there might be people in other disciplines in the room today, maybe project managers, salespeople, accounts. But basically being really good at those roles does not necessarily make you a great manager or leader. And when I moved into my first management and leadership roles, I didn't realise that. And into that insight and knowledge gap, I projected a lot of my anxieties. And that's why I set up a business, to help doers move into management and leadership roles. And that's also the topic I'm going to talk about today. How can you more seamlessly transition from a doer into a management leadership role a bit more seamlessly than I did. How I felt in all the different management leadership roles I did, usually about 3 months in, because that is the sort of artificial time that I gave myself to become great at a new thing. I generally felt a bit like I rode out of the safe waters of the harbour and I was in the great wide ocean with choppy waters, unfamiliar weather patterns, rocks, couldn't see the land, couldn't really see the ground beneath me. I felt quite literally out of my depth, and I think this was always at its most pronounced kind of 3 to 9 months into a new role. And what was happening was that I was applying a researcher mindset to management and leadership challenges and situations. And what made me a great researcher, and what probably makes a lot of people in this room great researchers, is not making mistakes, attention to detail, being really accurate, fixing, solving, having a clear point of view on stuff. That makes you a really great researcher, but actually when it comes to management and leadership, it's not your job to fix, it's not your job to solve. And I know James will talk about that point specifically quite in more detail. And it's not possible to be in control of everything. And in sort of trying to apply all of those research skills and all of the knowledge and the learning I had from research to my management and leadership role, I ended up stifling my team, and I just couldn't stay on top of everything in the way that I wanted to. So it was impacting the team and it was impacting me as well. And I started to feel like I was failing at the role, when actually I hadn't appreciated that it was a different role. Management leadership is fundamentally different from research. And how that played out, like in day-to-day instances, and Rachael sort of touched on this a little bit, is that I'd be in a situation maybe like this, something out of my comfort zone, and somebody in the audience would yawn, and I would be like completely catastrophizing off the back of this, and I would go up what I call the fantasy ladder. I'd be, oh my god, they're bored. Everyone's bored, my presentation's rubbish, I'm a terrible presenter, I'm not very good at this job, I'm just going to quit and become a yoga teacher. It's kind of went into that flight mode. And this was happening on, a number of different issues. I've just used the presenting example because it's quite relevant to being here today. But yeah, my sort of lack of confidence, I suppose, in the new role was colouring and filtering the way I was seeing different situations. And this was like a kind of narrative I was building for myself quite regularly. So I'll end my talk today with 3 tips for transitioning from a researcher to a management or leadership role, for rowing out of the harbour, getting off the fantasy ladder, whichever one of my metaphors struck a chord with you. And the 3 tips are distance, weaken, and find alternatives. So firstly, distance. Separate yourself from the feeling that you're having about yourself. And it's so easy to do this. Literally, you just add a few words into what you're saying. So you can say, I am having the thought that I'm bad at presenting. Or I'm noticing that I'm telling myself that I can't do this job. Because there's such a big difference between I can't do this, I'm not very good at this, to I'm telling myself that I'm not very good at this. So put some distance between yourself and the feeling. And then weaken that feeling. As Rachael was saying, they're pretty strong, those narratives, and they get really loud, as Rachael was saying, when you're trying to do something new, because your brain is trying to keep you safe. So we need to kind of weaken them a bit, and I play a game with quite a lot of my clients called fact or feeling. So we'll look at something like the fantasy ladder, and I'll say, okay, that's where you went in your mind. Out of that, what is a fact? Well, the only factor on there is that somebody yawned. Everything else is a feeling. And once you can separate evidence, and as researchers will be really good at this, evidence from your interpretation of the evidence, again, that's really powerful. So factual feeling. And the final one is find alternatives. So ask yourself, just what else could be true? Somebody yawned. They maybe had a big night out. They may be up 5 times in the night with a screaming child. Maybe they've got a big meeting coming up. The thought of it with their boss is making them feel tired. They're yawning. There are so many other alternatives than the one your brain might well take you to if you're feeling in a place of feeling a bit low in confidence. So really getting clear on what else could be true, and being clear on that will really help you. And it's really important, to start here, because when you trust yourself more, that's when you're in a position, to build trusted relationships with your team, to build trusted relationships with clients, which are the other really central bits of a management and leadership role. But it does start with you. If you're not in that place, you tend to do all those things that we know we're not supposed to do, like micromanage and try to get into everything. Thank you very much. I hope you all took something away from that. Follow me on LinkedIn, sign up to my newsletter, join my 6-week leadership development program in January. It's been a pleasure, and look forward to hearing all of your thoughts and questions in the Q&A. On to James, closing us out.
Well, you don't need me.
I'm sorry.
Of course we need you. Thanks, you two. Unsurprisingly, there are some common themes between what we're all kind of talking about today. And you talked, Rachel, about showing up. How should I show up to things? And I'm going to take the perspective and what I'm going to talk to you about that you've just entered the management track. You've just been promoted out of a job that you're really good at, and the skills that you created made you really good at that, into a job that you haven't yet built the skills to do well. I, like these two, used to work in the market research industry. I worked for Taluna for a good 10 years, I worked for Mintel before that, so I knocked around the market research industry for about 20 years. I was in the sales part of the business, so I squarely was the one that rampantly overpromised what we could actually do. And then you all had to go and deliver that. And along the way, I was in it a long time, and I developed a lot of successful habits along the way that made me better equipped at delivering the job that I had to do, which was the money. And along the way, I recruited people and I built up a load of habits that made us deliver the target that we were given. Usually, we overachieved it, lots of successful habits, but only later in my life did I realise that not all of the habits that I built that were successful were good for me or were sustainable. Some of you know some of this story, so I won't go into the whole thing. But at one point, in 2018-2019, when we'd just relentlessly beaten even more of our sales figures, somebody asked me how I was, and I did what we all do: fine, thanks, how are you? And the other person goes, fine, thanks, how are you? And we all play the how are you game. Nobody's really asking, definitely no one's listening. But somebody asked me how I really was, and I accidentally told the truth, which is, this is too hard, I can't do it anymore. Had a giant panic attack, thought I was actually going to die. So I lay on the floor thinking, this is what a heart attack looks like. And I went to A&E and they hooked me up to a load of stuff. I burned out really hard because my successful habits weren't good for me and they weren't sustainable. So I learned a few things the hard way, and I want to just maybe talk you through 2 or 3 of the things that I wish I'd known 20 years ago when I was just starting to get into a managerial type role. Would have been quite handy, I think. And certainly, to your point, my self-story and the narrative that I was telling myself about the characteristics that I should turn up with and display to my reports and my colleagues and my clients, I would have said that my values at that time, that I should be confident, calm, relentlessly deliver, and basically do it by myself. that I should be self-sufficient in that regard. That's what everybody responded to. So in this picture, this isn't a picture of me and Tara. Clearly, it's my hair's that. What I got wrong was the difference between supporting and solving. One of the several things I got wrong, the difference between supporting and solving. When somebody would come to me with a question or a challenge or a difficulty, I would listen just long enough to understand it, and then when they drew breath to carry on, I would insert my unsolicited advice and suggestions into that gap. Because I thought my role as a senior person or a leader was to solve everything, and was to have all the answers. And if somebody came to me with a problem, which usually started with, have you got 5 minutes? And I also would observe, never, ever is it 5 minutes. It's always longer than that. I would assume that my job was to listen, maybe break apart, and then solve for them. And I also thought that I was not allowed to bring problems to anyone else, since I was the one who wanted to solve everything. So my idea of support versus solve is that my support is to solve. I now think that that's different. So the reason I choose this picture, for those of people who like going to the gym lifting heavy weights, this person at the top is a squatter, and her job is not to lift the weight. That guy needs to lift the weight. She's only there to keep him safe and help him out a little bit, not to lift. So that's support. What tends to happen, or certainly what I used to do, is somebody would pile in with a problem. I'd slip into the wrong mode, and I would not do any of this. And I wouldn't ask. I wouldn't ask what they actually wanted, I just would assume. I wouldn't ask them, do you want support or a solution? As they came in. And I've got kids, some of you might. And what we tend to do as parents too, and as human beings, we're problem solvers, we want to take difficulty and pain away from someone else. At home, my daughter would tell me about some drama rather that she was having. I'd do the same thing. And what I've learned to do now, with my children and other people, is just ask, what do you want from me? Because it's helpful if I know what you want from me in that home. For the kids, it's, do you want help or a hug? And the answer is always hug. Then they'll offload some stuff, then ask again, do you want help or a hug? And at the end it might be help, at which point they're asking for and are ready for the question. So I wish I'd known that earlier on, because it would have taken some of the burden off me. So this is why I wish I had also had, but this is what I do now. Ask some of these questions. Just because you're coming to me with the issue, is it mine to solve? Are you asking me to solve it? The answer might be no and no, in which case, who do I know that might get involved in helping with this? There's a phrase that I like, which helps with this, I think. This fellow is Charles Kettering, and in about 1940 he ran the innovation department at General Motors, the car company in the US. And a tribute to him is this quote: problem shared is problem halved. A difficulty I have with that, aside from the fact that it's inaccurate, is that the idea of sharing a problem, that intrinsically it means if I'm telling it to you, it's now at least half your responsibility to fix it. So when you're that junior manager coming in and somebody brings an issue to you, you think, oh crap, they've asked me for help, therefore I have to half solve. Well, what if I don't have the answers? Now I'm feeling insecure. You didn't say that, you said this. A problem well stated is half solved. So what if, when somebody comes to you with a problem, what if it is not necessarily your job to solve it? What if it's your job to support them by hearing them out, so that you help them state the problem more clearly, in order that they understand it better? Completely different requirement on the table. He goes on to say, basically just keep going, you'll find the answer. So I'm not sure if that's true, because it suggests that it would just appear all by itself, but I do like the idea of keep at it, keep at it, keep at it. There's another quote which I put up there, but the extension of this was Einstein said, if I had 60 minutes to solve all of the world's problems, I'd spend 55 minutes to find them. That's interesting, that changes the dynamic. So when it came to myself earlier, when I thought I had to have all of the answers all by myself and that I shouldn't show any weakness by sharing the idea that I didn't have them, I wish somebody had come to me and said, I'll tell you what I'll do, I'll provide a soundboard for you to explain what your challenges are. There's no offer of solution there, soundboard. It would have been easier to receive, it would be easier for me to ask for too, somehow. Easier to ask for a soundboard than help. So I wish I'd had a soundboard. I wish I'd been better at knowing that that was my role, act as a soundboard, because when you force your brain to articulate thoughts through your mouth, they have to do so in order. And before then, they're just swirling around. So I find it really useful to say things out loud. I understand them better. Makes sense so far? It's a leading question. The only answer is yes. Very good. So when we're checking in with one another, which is the requirement of a manager, you're supposed to look after your team and yourself. You're supposed to check in. The trouble is, like I'm sure we've done lots of today already, we played a how are you game. Hi, how are you? I'm fine, thanks, how are you? I'm fine, thanks too. Great, why don't we talk about that project update? That's not a real check-in. The trouble is, in this country in particular, it's bastard hard to know the difference between an actual check-in, where I'm actually asking you how you actually are, versus the fake one. It's very difficult to know the difference, because we're polite. So I would argue that there's a way of doing it. But it might have to take some bravery from you, because you have to break that cycle. Hi, how are you? You know what the answer is. Fine, thanks. How are you? In which case you've got to go in again, but how are you really? Not in an intense way, but just, hey, how are you really? Or how are you? Change the emphasis, go in twice. And they still might not be volunteering anything, because that might be the first time you've done it, in which case you might have to go first. And here's the blurry line between authenticity and oversharing, self-moderation, all the rest. But every now and again it's worth admitting, times are tough, work is stressful. So I'm asking you how you are, because honestly, it's stressful sometimes, so I thought I'd just check in. A little bit of admission of humanity, work is sometimes stressful, doesn't make us real, it just makes us real. So you've got to give to get occasionally. And let's imagine that we've done a real check-in, and we've done a how are you, but how are you really? And somebody begins to tell us, now we've got to go back to the first lesson, which is just because they're telling me doesn't mean I've got to solve it. And this is an acronym, WAIT, W-A-I-T, what does it stand for? If I've asked you how you are, why am I talking? So just wait, if I'm genuinely asking and I've made time for it, shut up and let them speak. The pause is not your cue to say something, the pause is for process. So they're probably telling you something that they hadn't thought they were going to say. They're probably pausing to process to get to the next bit. So you've got to allow the pause. It's not your turn. Just wait. You'll be surprised at what comes next and what comes next. People seldom bring the actual problem. They bring the symptom of the problem. So you've got to wait for them to go down. So that's two things so far. Wait while they're talking. And here's the third thing. So in all the time that I was working, delivering numbers and and then leading up to completely life-changing, debilitating burnout, which saw me completely unable to function for well over a year, was because I think simplified a little bit. Because I thought that there were only two flavours of ethic: work hard, play hard. The harder I have to work, so long as I play equally as hard, I'm in balance. And play quite often meant coming to places like this with people like you, getting super smashed on 3 beers, which I'm not accusing anything to anyone doing in any particular direction, but for me that was my thing. Work really hard, I'm working way beyond my limits, so I'll drink really hard and exercise like an absolute maniac. This is like a 2-legged stool. You can balance on a 2-legged stool, but it takes loads of effort to do so. There's a third leg to that stool, as I've discovered. Rest hard, you've got to work hard, you've got to play hard, you've got to rest hard. If I asked everybody what their work ethic was, I bet they could tell me. A bit like some of the values work that Rachael might have. You'll get there pretty quickly. If I ask you what your play ethic is, I bet you can tell me. If I ask you what your rest ethic is, I bet you can't. But it's an intrinsic part of being able to function sustainably to a high level. And it's important to rest, so here's somebody else's research. Microsoft Word Lab, they hooked people up to electrodes, and there's a control group A, control group B. Red and orange is bad, blue and green is good. This lot did back-to-backs all the time. Back-to-back on Teams and Zoom and all the rest of it. And what that does to your brain is nothing to do with the content or the stressiness of the content. Your brain doesn't know the difference, it just knows skipped out too far. Just knows you've been relentlessly stimulated. It impacts your brain's ability and capacity to process stuff. Back-to-backs are bad, breaks are good. You better find out how to have some, and they don't have to be long. makes a material difference to your ability to process things. In hindsight, I probably don't even need that slide. I'm just sort of repeating myself now. But I will beam a summary at you just to try and bring all of those things together in a neat fashion. These are my opinions. I'm not telling you how to do it yourself. This is just what works for me. I'm not the solver of every problem. I never was. I never needed to be. And I don't need to be. But I can make the effort to inquire as to others to help them move forward into the solving of it. I needed soundboards all along. I needed the opportunity to articulate things. Had I done so more often earlier, who knows, I might not have burnt out. And the work hard, play hard, I'm still pretty good at that. I'm still working on the rest hard. So for me, had I known some of these things a little earlier, it might have gone a little easier. Thanks.
I'm just going to shout. I'm an MRS mentor, and I went to a workshop this week at the MRS on coaching and mentoring. And one of the exercises we had to do was we had to sit with one of our peers and ask 5 whys. And that's a lot about, so you're really digging down. It's not just, you don't accept what they've said to start with. You want to know why and why and why. And we both found it, I won't tell you who I was with, but we both found it enormously illuminating. It was really helpful. And it's funny because as a recruiter, as my team know, you're supposed to dig down, funnel down, ask lots of whys. But I realised that I didn't do that enough when I'm coaching. And yeah, it was amazingly useful. So, thank you. Actually, I'm going to go, sorry, I'll hog all the questions, but
Should we get some chairs?
yeah, if you could, that would be brilliant. Yeah, so also one other thing, I've got to look this through. So 2 books were recommended to me, one of which I've already downloaded as an audiobook because I'm dyslexic. But one was The Coaching Habit, Say Less, Ask More and Change the Way You Are Forever by somebody called Michael Bungay Stainer. Does that ring any bells? And the other one, which was actually all about understanding your mindset, which you really need to do before you can sort of slightly shift the perception, if that makes sense. It was by somebody called Keegan and Lee, and it was Immunity to Change. And I was just going to say, do you have any recommendations for books, having been recommended those 2? I mean, any of you, but you've got book clubs, so that really made me think.
Yes, definitely. I've got a reading list. I can circulate it. Immunity to Change is good. It's about finding the one thing. So if you can not fix, but if you can change that one thing, what's that going to open up for you? And it's a very it's quite a heavy read, but it's a very detailed process of how to get there. It's quite hard.
Yeah, I mean, I actually, because they talked us right through it, and I have to say at the end I was a bit like,
It's going to be a bit overwhelming.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure I follow it through, although the coach that was talking us through it talked how it impacted on her life, and it was immensely powerful. You almost wanted to cry at the end. So,
a great book to start with is Growth Mindset, which you may have come across or read. It's amazing. It'll make you think you can do anything you want with it. And if you're not a reader, she's got a brilliant, what's her name? Carol Dweck, Dr. Carol Dweck. She's got a brilliant TED Talk. So if you just Google Carol Dweck TED Talk, Growth Mindset, 15 minutes. It's brilliant. The power of yet, all that stuff. Really good. It's a nice place to start.
oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Definitely,
Yeah,
I'm
it's
just
good.
me thinking, well, I remember that. I need to write it down straight afterwards. Because that's really good. Thank you.
I just did, I can share it after the event as
So, I guess the next question I just wanted to ask is, how many of you have had coaching or been a mentee? Actually, I will ask about the difference between coaching and mentee, but so not many, but 6, 7. And after hearing this, how many of you would consider it? I know it's not cheap, but
Bloody good value.
it's
It's bloody
very
good value.
worthwhile. Yes.
Think of our confidence.
So, how many of you would? That's brilliant, because I honestly think it's such a worthwhile thing to do. So, I was going to ask something else, but I've gone completely blank. Oh yes, so the difference between coaching and mentoring. I mean, I, as a mentor, found that going to this workshop was massively useful because it was all about better coaching style, and I realised that coaches do things a lot better and more professionally, I guess, than mentors do. I don't know. What would you say?
I don't want to hop.
Sorry.
Well, it's interesting. I'd be interested to hear more about what you were learning this, was it a few weeks ago, the MRS?
No, it's this week.
This week, right?
Yeah,
this
really
week. No, I'd be
fresh.
interested to hear more about that because I do wonder if mentoring is borrowing more from the world of coaching. That's maybe my guess at what might be happening. But traditionally, I think the difference in the dynamics of a relationship would be that you'd have a mentor. A mentor would be somebody who has been there and done that, and so you are going to them for the wisdom, for the perspective, for some of these nuggets, like the things James is sharing. Sort of, I wish I'd known that. So I think there's a difference in the dynamic there. Whereas in the coaching relationship, we're not the expert on whoever's coming to the session. We're not the expert on them. We're certainly not the expert on where they work. It's a peer-to-peer relationship, and we're there to unlock, or to really understand and define what it is that you want, what it is that you're working towards, what really is holding you back, and to think about how you can move yourself forward towards that. So it's kind of a different dynamic between the two, I think. And in coaching, you're very, very overtly not the expert, and we're very trained to not advise, don't give advice.
Apart from we just did, but that's there's a different framework.
This is a different context.
There's
But in a
finding
coaching
options
relationship
now,
now, isn't there?
But I
There's
imagine
different kinds of coaches and mentors now as well, aren't there? And some people do
Yeah,
blend the
they
two.
do blend.
So it's really important you find the right coach or mentor or blend of. Know
Yeah.
what you want.
And how do you do that when it comes to coaching? Supposing somebody in this room and a few people put their hands up and said, yeah, I'd have a coach. How do they go about finding the right coach?
Shop around. I don't mean it to be glib, but the likelihood of the three of us being appropriate, any one of us or all of us being the appropriate coach for every person in the room is nil. I'm incredibly unlikely to be the right coach for every person in every scenario and every problem. There has to be, I can't think of the right word now, compatibility. You have to be compatible. So I actually think, and all half decent coaches will very happily allow it. You do, we tend to call it chemistry session or something like that. It's basically like a really short meeting just to see how compatible you are, how well you like them. You've got to trust them, and you've got to be prepared to open up and talk about some difficult stuff. So I would just say, don't go for the first coach to meet necessarily. Have a few sessions with a few different ones. It's always useful to ask for recommendations, but don't be put off, to put it another way, don't be put off if the first coach you ever meet, you think, oh, I'm not really sure if that's the right one for me. No, probably not. So go and have a go with another one. Or, not least, it maybe is a not now thing. Might be the right coach, but maybe not now.
And a good coach will say, look, I'm not the right fit for you. I think what you need is. So, and I think you just feel it, don't you? You'll be like, yeah, this is good. Or you'll be like, no, I'm not feeling this. That's why it's called chemistry calling. So,
Is there an association to find sort of names of people?
it's a great question. It's really hard to navigate finding a coach. I think it's an area that needs improving. So I think there are coaching platforms. So there are companies where you can go to them and say, I'd like a coach, and they'll say, okay, here's 3 that I think you might like, have a call with all 3, and you can choose the one that's right for you. So there's coaching platforms, they're a really good place to start, and I've got a really good one I can recommend called The Ascend. Brilliant. She's vetted all the coaches, and she'll get you with the right person. Otherwise, it is very much a bit of a ask people you know, or start with one coach, and if they're not right, they ought to be able to recommend another coach. And it's like, oh, that's not quite what I need. You know, they ought to be able to recommend just pour the water on it. So, just put that down. So I think it is something that could be better for sure.
And I don't think Tara will ask me again if I hog all the questions. So can I throw some of the questions out to you? Who's got a question? You must have a question. They were such interesting talks. James.
Just in terms of like from a kind of company point of view, because as you sort of said, often you do good at your job and you get thrown into having a team with no real training and stuff. So from your experience from a kind of employer's point of view, what can they do better to ensure that people actually have got the kind of right training in place or coaching for being a good manager?
Well, what can they do better? I mean, I obviously firmly believe that the agency needs to invest in people who are moving into leadership and management roles, and the benefits of that are huge. When you think, you know, new managers within the business, they're the middle, they're like the beating heart of the agency really. They are the people like trying to interpret what senior leadership want all the time, sort of the vision and strategy, and they're like the front line for all of the team challenges and issues. So I think there's a huge need for it, but I don't think it's done very much. I don't think people are well supported at that level, and that's a shame. I mean, what can they do? They can hire me. Talk to me. Yeah, I think they need to get people that support, don't they?
Do you think they should choose more carefully? Because often it's just you've got a team now, go ahead and do it. Obviously, coaching and training is part of it, but do you think there's maybe not standing about their career ambitions more during the future? Because they could be a good just kind of one woman, one man kind of team, I suppose, and not have a team of responsibility. So do you think that's something to explore? Or?
I do think we've got quite locked into, like the only way to progress is to sort of become a manager or become a leader. I think like what a business owner might say to that though is, you know, I think the other route you go down, if you're not going down the management and leadership bit, is more in terms of commercial and sales and going in that direction. I think it's hard to keep becoming a more senior and senior doer and justify pay rises. I think that's going to be the challenge. So it's how do you grow the business, and whether that's growing people or growing the clients and the accounts. But I do agree that people role is not the right role for everybody, and again I don't think that's something that agencies are very good at, or maybe people themselves are not very good at working out what they want because they just think that maybe the only way to progress and be promoted is to have a direct report.
Oh, the only thing I was going to add was to flip it around, and rather than wait for the agency to provide, is to take the ownership responsibility and go, sure, I'd like more money and more responsibility, that sounds terrific. But what I'd also like is to be better equipped with some skills to do that part of the job well. Rather than oscillating wildly between the doer and the manager, they're actually two jobs. We don't have to necessarily do them simultaneously. Just have the courage, I guess, to go, yes please, thank you, I'll take that sounds great. But I'd like to be really good at people managing, so is it okay if I look for some courses to do if they don't already exist? Can I have a look around and find a couple that I think might suit? And if the agency in question goes, absolutely bugger off, that should maybe inform your decision whether or not to take that job in the first place.
I think
I think this is a really good point, because we see as recruitment consultants so many people struggle moving up, and I've talked to people about coaching, they feel they've got to pay for it themselves and they can't afford it, and they go, oh no, my company wouldn't pay for it. But you're right, they're probably not even asked. Yeah, it's a really, really good point.
Yeah, I think it's about asking and saying how it's going to help you. So maybe we can support, actually, I'm thinking we can support better on explaining what you get from coaching, perhaps.
Yeah.
A bit more clearly, so people can go in and say, this is what it's going to give me. Look, here's the evidence, here's the proof. I need to work out what the skills are, what clients I need to, whatever.
And it might be a bit off there, but I think a lot of really senior people also to learn on the job, and I think there's that kind of, and that sort of persists, that mindset that like you'll just learn by doing. But I think the world has moved on quite a lot from when they were going into those positions, because we work remotely so much more now, especially the senior people who want the flexible working, that I don't think you can learn the art of management and leadership as much by osmosis as they maybe did 10 years ago, where they had a lot of different people doing it who they could kind of learn from. And I think the way in which you manage and lead, I think the way in which we lead now, I've done that as well. I think, and this is a good thing, but I think there's so many more ways to be a leader now. I think it used to be a bit more monolithic, like what made a good leader, and I think now there's kind of broadening out of that, which again is great, but it does create the challenge of, well, how do I do it? And that's when people come to me, they say, I need a framework, give me a toolkit. It's like that thing of wanting to know how to do it.
Other questions? Sorry, I don't know your name.
Hi there, James Richard from the IMA. So I work with inside leaders in big corporate organisations. I'm fascinated by this transition that you described from doers to managers, but also managers to leaders. And I'm wondering whether either you think that there's a point where people become so senior that they actually find it very difficult to ask for help and to change the way in which they help their colleagues, and whether you've got good tips for helping people who are in that situation who realise that they need help managing.
I would say that everyone would benefit from a coach, and I think you're either open-minded to that or you can be very close-minded to that. So I work with a lot of senior leaders and entrepreneurs, founders of their own companies, and I think what they get from coaching is different to what someone more junior would get from coaching. So for those people, it's more about, I need a space where I can navigate this and find my way forward, because it's all busy and you've got no support or training anymore, you're just kind of doing it. So it's a space to work things out and work through and find your direction, and I think that's invaluable, because I think to lead a company or a team or a business without that support, I mean, I take my hat off to you if you can do it and stay sane and feel great about it, amazing. But equally, how much more could you achieve, whatever that means to you? I mean, some of my clients, suddenly they're like, actually, I don't want to hit that target, actually, I want to travel more. So it's not, I'm not talking about monetary every time, but it's about finding and staying connected to your vision and what you want from your life. So we're only here once, and I think as you get older, there's more to navigate. You get more experience, there's much more to navigate, and there's life. So, yeah, it's a tricky one, because I think you're either open-minded to it and you give it a go or you don't. Or maybe you come across someone like these guys and you think, well, actually, maybe it's worth a little dabble. I don't know. Maybe you come across someone who's had a dabble. Someone who's had some coaching and they rave about it, and then you might change your mind. But it has to come from the person. You can't force someone to coach themselves.
Anyone else?
There are different types of coaches. There exist like life coaches, management and leadership, business coaches, some other types. So is it really a difference between them, and are you specializing in some like this?
Yes, there are a lot of coaches out there. Health, health, parenting, fitness. I think they do have a different slant. They will have a different slant, and there is a difference between them all. I mean, I think at the foundation, like we're all working to that same sort of model that a lot of us, that we've talked about today, in terms of getting clear on where you're trying to get to, what's holding you back, what can support you, and what you can do about that. But yes, there's loads of different sort of bits of your universe that you can bring in a coach to support you with.
I would add a sort of good news, bad news answer to that. And you can choose which one it is. There's absolutely no barrier to entry to becoming a coach. There's no legal requirement to study. You don't have to have a qualification. You could show up this afternoon after this and decide that you're resigning and becoming a coach, and you can decide on what. And no one will challenge you particularly on it, because there's no requirement to go to school. which is not to say that none of us have. We've all got to coaching school, and there are lots of providers that do it. So there are established, safe, appropriate, ethical frameworks that we've all chosen to spend money to study. There are a shit ton of other people who have chosen not to do that. I'm not to denigrate whether or not they're any good per se, but I just would offer that it's worth doing a fragment of due diligence to find out whether the person who might be claiming to be expert on whatever has done some study and some schooling. To an extension of your mentoring versus coach question, there is another Venn diagram of coach and therapist, and that they can overlap substantially as well.
Yeah.
And I happen to help people with stress and pressure because I've learned the sharp end of not doing that, so I've got a particular affinity for that. So I end up having conversations with people about pressure, and those conversations can get pretty dark pretty quickly sometimes. I have to be really conscious that I'm safe and so are they, that we're not straying into a professional area that I'm ill-equipped to deal with, because I'm not a therapist or a doctor or a psychologist. So yeah, there are loads of coaches. They'll all specialise in particular things. Some will have really deeply trained to be very, very safe and very good in that area as well, but it's not necessarily a requirement. So a little bit of diligence as to who you're about to share quite a lot of your life with, and whether they're equipped with frameworks to A, do it well, but B, do it safely.
It's interesting because that actually came up again on this day at the MRS, because this lady talked us through this method, and then, as I said, certainly brought me nearly to tears. And then you were sort of thinking, crikey, where is the crossover? Because she was talking about some very deep-rooted beliefs that had set her mindset. And she said that it was as I'm saying, it was all very complicated, so I'm not sure I'm saying it right, but a therapist is trying to sort of help you overcome those, whereas you're trying to, as a coach, help them achieve a particular goal, and that as long as you're goal focused rather than sort of, then it's not the same. I don't know if that.
Well, my shorthand for that would be, you have to go into the past to understand context. So you have to understand how you got to where you got to. So we do have to ask questions about that. People will share some things. But if the bulk of the session is held in the past, why do you think that way? What happened there? If we're living in the past all the time, that tends to be more therapeutic, right? Coaches live in today and tomorrow. So the bulk of the conversation will be, how is that impacting you today? And what can you do differently tomorrow?
Yeah.
So the emphasis is wildly different.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Any other questions?
I just was wondering, how important is it for the coach to be aware of the industry that you work in? Do they need to have some knowledge background? And also, do they need to be in the same geography? Does that help?
I would say no and no. Simple answer. I mean, yes, I've worked in research for a long time, so I get the industry. You don't need to. I mean, I work with people in tech, I work with an ambassador, I work with all sorts of people in very different industries. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, because I'm not a mentor, and I'm not going to tell you what to do. I wouldn't have a clue anyway, because your role and your team and your context and your life are completely unique to you. So there could, I think in a mentee-mentor relationship, it's critical. I think as a coach, no. And sometimes it can get in the way, because the coach can get attached sometimes. Because they're like, oh, I've experienced this. And that's okay if you've agreed together, this is going to be a coaching, mentoring, hybrid. It's just, yes, I want that from you. That's fine. But as a coach, you can't be attached to the outcome. You've got to be neutral, because, you know, it's your life, not ours. So I would say it's not important, for me at least. And I would say geography. COVID was really helpful, because everyone was forced to do everything on Zoom. And before that, trying to convince someone to have a coaching session on Zoom was so challenging. I don't know how you found it. It was always a little bit challenging for me at least. And then suddenly everyone got used to it. And I'm like, oh, this works. This totally works. And I think sometimes people prefer it because there's almost a bit of a distance. It can be a bit more, somehow you're a bit more self-contained in yourself. I don't know. I think it works brilliantly. And I've got clients in different countries, it's not a problem. So I would say no. I mean, you could be someone that really, really wants to be eyeball to eyeball with someone in the room, and that's totally fine, and that's your prerogative, and then you need to find a coach that's in your geography, absolutely. So I'd say know yourself, know what you need, but I don't think, I personally, I think with what you do and what you do, I think industry does matter. I think with what I do, it doesn't matter. So again, it's really, if you want some mentoring and you want advice, you want training or anything where there's some telling, it matters. Otherwise, I don't think that's But you guys might disagree on that one.
You made a good assumption about so geography, no. I work with people all over the world, and the Zoom thing, I think Zoom's great for coaching. I did sessions in like hotel lobbies before, and actually that's a bit uncomfortable. I don't know where you were doing yours, but I work for myself. I don't have an office or anything to go to, and I think if you're doing them in people's workplaces, that isn't always where people want to do it as well, visibly in a room and stuff. So definitely remote works really well. I think for my proposition and what I support people on, and actually support the agency on as well, because like to your point, it's not just about all on that manager and leader to do something differently, it's like the support of the whole. I think the fact that I worked in the industry is pretty important for that. So I think for what I do, I only work with inside agencies. So
And my answer is both of them. It is important if it's important to them. It's not important if it isn't. My preference is to see people in the flesh because I'm thoroughly tired of looking at screens all the time. But that's not up to me.
I think it's know what you want and find that. And that's a great start for coaching, to start asking, what do I want?
Is there any qualifications, when you were saying you don't have to be, is there any qualifications we should look for?
yeah.
Ideally, they are accredited.
Okay,
Some.
there is okay.
It's
Accredited in what?
The International Coaching Federation, the ICF, they have different layers of accreditation. So you start as an ACC, then you go to a PCC, and then you become an MCC. That just means how long you've been coaching, how much experience you've got.
Yeah.
So an MCC is going to be mega experienced. They're like a master coach. You will pay big money for that person. So you can look for that, but as long as they've got that stamp of accreditation, it means they sign up to the ethics of coaching. So all the things you might worry about, confidentiality, just being a bit mad, anything, you've signed up to a code of ethics. Beyond that, there's a million different training programs. Just have a quick look at that training program and think, does that look good to me? Does that look like, is that kind of in the area? Does that, I just have it, like, exactly to your point, a little due diligence.
That's what they train someone. What we all taught was
Stamps of approval.
we all learned the same 4 or 5 coaching models. Whatever school they've gone to, we've all studied the same 4 or 5 coaching models. And each school wants you to buy their next course, but they're all equally applicable. So have they trained somewhere? Have they invested some money and some time in training with a proper place? Doesn't matter where the place is. Start there. Are they accredited? Is helpful but not essential. Has this person trained? Do they know what they're doing? Or have they just made up a website yesterday on Wix?
And to reassure you, I don't think there's many coaches out there doing that, to be honest. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. I don't think, maybe I'm just outrageously optimistic, which is a possible tendency.
But it is unregulated, isn't it?
It is unregulated, yes.
And I do think that's something that
It is
puts
unregulated.
people off. They just don't know where to start.
Yeah.
Tara is standing up, and I'm noticing other people are walking in.
Well, thank you so much. That was a wonderful session. Absolutely brilliant. Let's give them all a round of applause.